Why do we complicate things without even realizing it? Have you ever had a boss who just couldn't bring themselves to give a straightforward answer or explanation? Coworkers who were unable to do it either? Or have you noticed this in yourself, that it's just hard to give a straightforward explanation, make a decision, and move on? Well, if so, this is the video for you. Hi, I'm Mike Targus, founder of Center Desk Leadership Coaching. I'm a retired Marine. I did 21 years in the Marine Corps and 13 years as of today in the civilian world, in a second career as an engineer and project manager and manager of those teams. So I've seen both sides of the fence, military and civilian. And I founded Center Desk Leadership Coaching to bring a lot of my military lessons into the civilian world and tested them by actually working in those jobs myself. And I still am. But we tend to complicate things. Complexity. We add complexity. And as you probably suspect or know, complexity is the enemy of clarity. It's a little counterintuitive. You might think that more details, more information about a certain subject is going to provide a better explanation, but a lot of times we find ourselves in situations where we overdo it. And one of the things that I like to tell people is that if people don't understand, then they can't contribute. So for example, if you have a group of 10 people in a room, you should be able to get the benefit of all 10 people contributing. But when the person that's running the discussion, or maybe there's a couple of people like that in the room, if they're being overly complex, if they're complicating the matter at hand, then you're going to lose people and they're not going to be able to follow along. And thus, you're not going to have 10 people contributing. You're going to have maybe a couple. Maybe it's just the people speaking. So why do we do this? Why do we feel the need to complicate things? Well, complexity feels like intelligence. If you don't stop and think about it, you can fall into this trap where you're trying to demonstrate how much you know. But the irony is, the less we know about something, the more likely we are to complicate it. It's a sort of unintended cover-up, and it may not be malicious, and it may not even be intentional. It might be subconscious. It might just be our nerves at work. We might be able to create or maintain an image that we think we need in front of the group, of being smart, articulate, or experienced. We may even be trying to cover up things we don't know by adding in details or jargon or things that people just don't really understand. And we might be trying to protect the decisions that we're about to make, because more complicated decisions that are justified by a lot of details are really easier to defend, because the understanding is actually not as good. The explanation is actually a little bit more vague when you introduce unnecessary details or complexity. But the thing you got to remember as a leader is it's not about you and the image that you're portraying. It's about gaining understanding as a group and solving a problem. And the fastest way to solve that problem is to be as simplistic as you can, which really requires more understanding, more rehearsing of the concept. You have to be smoother with your speech and explanation. One of the things working against you is simple people aren't necessarily seen as thoughtful. When you describe somebody as simple, it's not really a compliment. Well, when really we should be describing people that we're talking about here as straightforward. Straightforward is a compliment. But depending on what culture you're in, it may not be respected. Something else complexity does, it makes it easier to dodge or not take accountability. Vague positions or vague stances offer the presenter a lot of ways out when confronted. It's easier to avoid challenge because logical, straightforward presentations or answers are more easily critiqued. But if you think about it, the reason they're more easily critiqued is because people understand where you're coming from. They can identify the position that you're taking, which is really the goal in the first place. But when we add these layers of details, we create dependencies between them. The presenter can more easily dodge the challenge. They can hide in the details. So in that sense, complexity is a little bit of a shield. But the best straightforward decision-making is stripped down to the bare essentials. There's no shield. And that requires the person saying it, taking a position, to really know what they're talking about and stand behind it. And in the end, answers of just yes or no are the ideal decisions in that regard. Another thing complexity allows us to do is delay decision making. Simplicity forces action, but it's tempting because it may feel responsible on your part to take more time to make that decision. And that's where your 1 hour meeting maybe goes long into a 2 hour meeting, or maybe you schedule more meetings or more discussions. You feel like you're really digging deeper, and sometimes there is a need to do that, but a lot of times it's not necessary. And the answer is right there in front of you. You just got to state it. You got to take a stand and say what you think. By the way, you may not have that time to give. There's other things going on. But complexity can mimic competence. We sound smart. We sound like we know what we're talking about. And to an indifferent group, that may be fine. They may just let you do that. Conversely, if something's very simple, it looks like maybe it's not as thoughtful. So we add steps, we use complicated language, jargon, diagrams, slides. But what you have to ask yourself, is it just an act? Do I need all that? Are you just showing people all the work you've done? That's another big one. And you have to realize that people probably don't care how much time you've put into something. Unless you're in school, if you're in a workplace, people just want the answer to move on and get on with other things. This is a good role for data. Let the data do the speaking. For example, you might be talking about retention. You could say something like, our turnover has doubled in the last 2 years. That's all you need to say. People that are listening to that, they hear that data point and they know we might have a retention problem. You might be able to cut out a lot of explanation by just introducing one relevant data point. Because when we really understand something, we're able to explain it simply. One way to look at simplicity is it's a public commitment. And when you publicly commit, when you take a stand, you become vulnerable. This is another reason why it can be natural to want to be more complicated, is to avoid all that. It's easier to avoid tough questions the more complex you are. It's like camouflage. You may have anxiety about the outcome. Maybe you have fear of failure, fear of conflict. And a real interesting one is you may have fear of being too decisive or appearing too decisive. You may think that you're going to anger people, or you're going to give some sort of negative impression by being decisive, come off know-it-all, or maybe you're just scared of being wrong. But you have to have the interest of the group in mind. And you want to be careful that you're not rewarding complexity. One easy way to detect this is the use of jargon. And jargon is industry-specific language. But the way to think about it is it's exclusive, because depending on the group that you're talking to, if you're talking to a group of like-minded experts, jargon may be appropriate. But if you're leading a multidisciplinary team, or if you're talking to a big group, jargon is one of the worst things that you can introduce. You also want to be careful on judging people on their level of sophistication in explanations. If you're in a college class, that's one thing. But if it's a real work environment, you're probably better off encouraging people to be more straightforward. And if you think about it, when people are what you would call messy thinkers, or they're just pulling all kinds of details out of the air seemingly, those people do appear to be thoughtful. But the question is that what you want in the workplace? More likely than not, you're focused on productivity, and productivity has to do with clarity and efficient use of time. And that's one way to judge whether or not something is overly complex, is there's really no emphasis on time or result. In other words, people have time to devote to pontificating or over-explaining concepts and ideas instead of just making a decision. So how do we help somebody, or maybe help ourselves, out of this complexity trap? The first thing is you really have to believe that if you can't explain something in a simple manner, you don't fully understand it. And that's an idea that is largely attributed to Einstein and Richard Feynman, who's also a physicist, who said anything you say should be able to be explained to a college freshman. So you and I can take that to mean explain things in a way that the newest member of your organization can follow along and understand. And that may be really difficult, to take a complex topic and boil it down in a way that everybody can understand. It takes more preparation and rehearsal and confidence. And you have to keep in mind that people are complicated, and there are some people that want those details, but that doesn't mean your solution needs to be complicated as well. Second thing is make it known that when you're simple or simplicity itself, that respects people's time and the mission of the organization. And most businesses are that way. Time is valuable. And the third one is you got to ask the person or ask yourself this question. Am I afraid of disagreement? And that may be kind of a tough question for somebody to answer to you, but plant the idea in their head. If they're not afraid of disagreement, then just be a little bit more straightforward. Take a stand. People respect that. Number 4, encourage disciplined responses. Can you state your position in something as short as one sentence? Or if it's not one sentence, in just a couple sentences, can you tie your position to the solution that's needed, to the purpose of the organization, to the purpose of the plan, to what you're trying to do in a bigger sense? Disciplined responses. Number 5 is show detail only when needed. Have it ready, but you don't have to go through everything to get to the point. In fact, when you're talking to executives, that's the last thing you want to do is build up to the point you're trying to make. You want to lead with the bottom line, or you want to give the answer first, is another way of saying it. Because your audience needs the answer. They don't need the homework that you did. They may be interested in it. You can cover that later. And the 6th and final, and I think most important way we can help people or help ourselves with overcomplicating things is just to default to clarity. Introduce complexity only when absolutely needed. And that's relative. But encourage, demonstrate yourself, and reward people that are very straightforward and clear. Highlight when people are able to say yes or no in response to questions, because those are some of your more courageous people. And that's a good example to set for the rest of the group. And that's it. Just a little bit on why we overcomplicate things. If you don't stop and think about it, you may do it yourself. Hope this video was helpful to you. If you like, consider subscribing. If you or the organization needs help in these kind of areas or just leadership coaching in general, my contact info is in the description. Thanks a lot.